Thank you. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, Your Royal Highness, other distinguished guests. I understand I have colleagues from the Canadian Embassy here today as well. It's absolutely thrilling to be here in your beautiful country, and I'm slightly humbled to be presenting urban innovation and lessons from Toronto. But I think the opening comment was an important one. If we can, in fact, adapt and transform and change our most car oriented city, it ought to give us hope for elsewhere. So I humbly submit this presentation to you today with the hope that there might be some grain of truth, some inspiration that may have relevance in this context. Now, my city is in fact in the Great Lakes region in North America. You can see in the small key map right here that we are right on the border with the United States, on the eastern shore. This is the Great Lakes region, the largest freshwater body of water in the world. So we too are surrounded by water. And our city is a growing city. 2.8 million people. We are growing by approximately 60,000 people on an annual basis, over 100,000 people in our region. So our region is a mega center. It's the third largest region in North America. We're the third largest city ourselves in North America. We are one of the largest tech hubs outside of Silicon Valley and the financial center, of course, of Canada. Now, I like this picture because it's kind of an idealized, glossy image of the city glancing through the trees from Toronto Island, which is an island just off the shores of the city where a tremendous amount of recreational activity takes place. But this is a really good image of Toronto, too, because over 50% of our population is foreign born, and we see continuing to welcome and absorb immigration and refugees as a critical part of our identity and character, both as a city and a nation. We continue to welcome the world. We see that as essential to our economic development and growth, our entrepreneurialism, but also our character. We want to be a beacon within the world in a globe where often we're seeing a very different attitude taken towards immigration. So this is in fact Chinatown, but we have Greek Town and Little Italy. There's a tremendous amount of multiculturalism in the city that we see as adding to the vibrancy and character of the places where we live. We have a vision for our city that every key decision really, it's the hook that brings together every key decision in our city. And I'm just going to walk through some of the themes of that vision. The first one being vibrant neighborhoods that are a part of complete communities. So the old model of planning was all about assuming that you would live in one area of the city, you would work in another area of the city, and there would be a wonderful, super fast highway that would get you from one place to the next. The new model of cities, the key adaptation that we have embraced, that is all about reducing our carbon footprint, is about creating complete communities, about adding a mixture of uses in places where they didn't exist before. And I'll walk through a series of very specific examples of how it is that we're seeking to do that. But this is really the biggest part of our vision for our city, is recognizing that we can create complete communities where the best way to get to work, to get to the doctor, to buy your groceries, to visit friends, is by walking. Walking becomes the linchpin for moving in complete communities. We also recognize that cities are successful by design. Affordable housing isn't going to happen by accident. Affordable housing in our cities, as we make our city more livable, as we welcome more and more people, affordable housing will be achieved by planning for it, by having a strategy that explicitly recognizes and identifies affordable housing as a part of every complete community. We have had the undistinguished honor over the course of the past several years of making the list of the most expensive cities in the world, not unlike Oslo. Our housing prices are a critical part of that. We've seen a complete separation between local wages and housing prices as we've become more and more absorbed in the global economy. We've seen international capital coming into this city. What's become clear is that the market can no longer provide affordable housing for all. Housing has become commodified. Housing has become an asset to be traded, which is very different from a vision of a city where housing is in fact a home, where housing is a place where children can meet with their families and eat dinner and do their homework around the dining room table. That's a very different vision from housing as an asset that's meant to be bought and traded in such a way as to generate wealth. So we're thinking very carefully, and this is where I'll end my presentation, on this critical question of housing affordability, because if we do not get this right, who cares about walkable communities? Who cares about creating complete communities? Who cares about sustainability if we're only really designing that for a very small and lucky portion of the population? And that's really what's happening in many of our global cities today. We recognize that an affordable, high-quality transit system is the backbone that allows complete communities to be connected into the broader fabric of a city and in a region. And this is an essential part of delivering on the promise of walkable, complete communities, is that option of never needing to own a car and living without a car. We also know that a vibrant downtown that is designed for the connectivity and the innovation that can attract and facilitate stable and high-paying jobs is essential to the overall health of the city. So we focus in our policy frameworks on linking complete communities and designs to delivering on that objective of creating a creative economy. We also know that clean air, land, and water, which a generation ago we didn't think about too much, is now at the fore of understanding both the long-term sustainability of our cities, but also our health. So whereas when I was growing up as a kid, the 9 different beaches in the city of Toronto, you would never think of swimming in urban beaches. You got in your car and you drove away to the countryside, to a cottage or a cabin, so you could swim in the clean water of those Great Lakes. Today, all 9 of our beaches in Toronto are blue flag beaches. And that is because we focused on our water quality and on our systems in order to create and prioritize clean air, land, and water. And complete communities is all about clean air, land, and water right where people live. We also recognize that we need to design green spaces of a variety of different sizes and shapes and public squares that bring people together. I had a beautiful experience about a year and a half ago in a neighborhood park adjacent to my house, not far from my house. I went down into the park and I was there with my niece and nephew, and a little kid fell off a swing. And my maternal instincts kicked in, and I ran over and I picked up this child and I put him on my hip, and I was kind of bouncing him on my hip and looking around, where are the parents of this child who was crying feverishly? And 2 people came running up to me, and it became very clear that they didn't really speak much English. But we struggled to have a conversation, and over the next 5 minutes, I discovered that they'd only been in Canada for 6 weeks, and they came all the way from Syria. And this was their new home. They were Syrian refugees. We took in a significant number of Syrian refugees in the Canadian context. When we design our public spaces right, they provide opportunities for this kind of human interaction that expands the humanity of everyone in our cities. When we get the design of our spaces right, and this too is a critical part of creating complete communities. We also know that there's a great opportunity to provide a wealth of recreational opportunities that promote health and wellness right within the urban fabric of our city. This idea that if you want to go for a hike, or you want to ski, or you want to skate, that you have to leave the city, that you have to get out into your car and drive away, is an old model. The new model, the adaptation, where we create complete communities, is when you can walk out your door and undertake recreational activities within close proximity to home. We also recognize that how we design and plan our waterfront is critical to ensuring that our waterfront is in fact a shared asset and not an asset that's only developed for the super rich or the super wealthy, which has actually been the old model in the city of Toronto. The wealthier you were, the closer you could get to the water's edge. The new model is about saying the waterfront is actually a shared resource that ought to be a place where we can all come together. We know that cultural facilities that celebrate the best of city living are an important part of complete communities as well, because they help us tell our story, they help us understand ourselves. Museums and exhibits and places for art and artists need to be integrated into this vision of complete communities. We also know that when we get our architecture and our urban design right, not only do we create places that become a magnet for people, but we astonish and we inspire as part of everyday life. We are all elevated through excellence in design. Complete communities think carefully about design. Don't leave it as something that's superfluous, but recognize that it's essential to how we live together. Now, in the city of Toronto, our city is becoming denser. This is a model of what the skyline looked like just over 10 years ago. But I'm about to click the button, and you're going to see all the new buildings that we've added over the course of 10 years. Just to go back, this is what it looked like just over 10 years ago. This is what it looks like today. All growth isn't good. But when we get the design right, when we get the design of the street and the mix of uses so that we ensure we're building out a complete community, we can begin to deliver on places that become livable. And that's been our dream and our vision. We've become denser, but our water has become cleaner. We've become denser, but our air quality has become cleaner. We've become denser, but we haven't been adding more cars. We haven't added any more cars. We've added more transit, and we've added the infrastructure to promote walking as a key way to move from place to place. So we've becoming denser, but on an individual basis, our environmental footprint, our carbon footprint has in fact been going down. And this is the opportunity that we can adapt and we can change in such a way that we can make our cities both livable and more sustainable over time. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about both how we got here, and then I'm going to walk through 7 examples of specific things that we're doing just to show you how all of this change, all of these ideas I've been talking about, how are they actually materializing in delivering complete communities. Now, this is where our story always has to begin. This is our region. You can see Lake Ontario in the foreground, the city of Toronto. The reddish areas are our built-out areas. And what you see in green is our green belt, which was brought in as a policy framework approximately 12 years ago now. We had to fight hard. It took 10 years to get it put in place. It's over 2 million hectares of protected land where you cannot build. Now, this is where the story starts, because identifying very clearly where growth won't go is essential to knowing where growth will go. We would never have seen the urban intensification that I'm about to show you and that I showed you in that model. We would never have seen that if we hadn't done this first. If we hadn't first created clarity about the fact that we no longer wanted to sprawl, despite the fact that we have sprawled for generations. So this is like a pivot. We were growing in one way, and we said, you know what? We're going to draw a line in the sand, and we're not going to grow that way anymore. We're now going to grow in a fundamentally different way. And the Greenbelt is the policy framework that signified this pivot from sprawl to becoming a dense urban region. One of the other drivers and critical changes that has been essential to advancing change in the Toronto region is recognizing changing consumer preferences. And this is really about echo boomers, about millennials, people between the ages of 16 and 34 years old, who have made it very clear that they have a fundamentally different preference. Sometimes because they grew up with the long commute and they're saying, forget it. I want to walk to work. I'm no longer prepared to sit on a train or sit in a car for 45 minutes every day. I did that through my childhood. I'm not going to do it as an adult. Or sometimes it's driven by a very clear understanding of the environmental impact of our previous sprawling approach to growth. Regardless of which it is, we have a changing consumer preference, and we want to attract these 16 to 34-year-olds because we know that the growth of our city is actually contingent on attracting young people into the core of the city. So that's a critical driver. We also know that there is, when we paint this vision of the future around being able to walk to work, being able to live within a community and do a whole variety of things within walking distance of home, we know that when we paint that vision of complete communities, that the vast majority of the public puts their hand up and says, I'm in, I want to do that. Very few people in the overall Toronto region today can actually walk to work. It's a very small percentage. In the downtown core, it's quite high. It's almost 75%. But when we scan the entire region and we ask people, if we gave you this choice or this choice, a big house with a big yard, but you're going to have to own 2 cars and you'll have to drive 30 or 45 minutes to work every day, or smaller house, smaller yard, urban center, adjacent to transit, 36% say, if you gave me that option, that would be my choice. So we know that when we deliver and we design complete communities, that we in fact create an option for people that doesn't exist, but that is in our long-term interest from a sustainability perspective, in terms of better using land more efficiently, but also in terms of creating connected communities. Now, this is an example of a transformation along our waterfront where we've began to design what that might look like in terms of shifting away from the car-oriented infrastructure of the past to creating streets where there's a whole variety of choices in terms of how people can get around. A generous public realm, separated cycling infrastructure, prioritizing the transit corridor. We've recently implemented a pilot project that's about an adaptation, a quick win, taking the cars off of our streetcar corridors, making them priority for transit. This has been an incredible success in driving the transit-oriented city. We're also redesigning our public spaces. This is in a heritage conservation district where we're also adding growth. But when we begin to create and deliver on that dream of a walkable community, it means we need to significantly reinvest in our public spaces so that our public spaces deliver on the promise of that astonishing and beautiful urban design and architecture. And when we do so, we attract private investment. This is right in the heart of the city. This is a development on 2.5 acres, 900 rental units, 28 heritage buildings that are restored, a Dutch-style Woonwerf moving right through the center of the site. This is on a transit location. This is all private investment that is responding to this opportunity of providing walkable communities where people can live, work, and play right within their neighborhood. Now, that greenbelt slide that I showed you has resulted in driving the growth into the core. This is a map of the whole city of Toronto. Every dot represents a new project that is under construction. But what we've seen is that the area of the city where we have the best transit, the best parks and walking infrastructure is in fact growing 4 times faster than the rest of the city, which raises an interesting opportunity and proposition, which is if we can create walkable communities everywhere, can we attract private investment and growth everywhere? Can we begin to adapt the city in a whole variety of different places? Because we've seen that as we've adapted and transformed the urban environment, that we've attracted growth, responding to that consumer preference, and we've in fact increased our sustainability as a city. This only happens when we link together employment with residential growth. We will not, in fact, deliver on complete communities if employment growth is happening in different areas from where residential growth is happening. The two must be linked together to deliver on this option, this opportunity of complete communities. So I'd like to just go through 7 quick examples of how we can shift from focusing on buildings and infrastructure to places for people, to complete communities. And the first is detailed precinct planning. The details actually matter. We have to deliver on the ground level. It's not enough to simply talk about mixing up the uses, but we have to deliver the public spaces that make recreation in dense urban living a real opportunity. A priority for the public round is essential when we add density. If we only add density, but we don't significantly enhance the public realm, we don't deliver on the promise. It's critical that we think about the integration of public spaces and connections for pedestrians first, rather than primarily focusing on the character and the quality of individual buildings. We must think of public space in the public realm as being the backbone upon which complete communities and sustainable communities will be built. It's not just infrastructure, it's not just buildings, it's about the places that we create. We've also embraced what I'll call extreme mixed use, breaking all the rules. The Distillery District is one of our oldest districts in the city. It was built in the 18th century as a brewery. And today it is over 40 buildings that are linked by only a pedestrian realm. They are historic Victorian era buildings. Excuse me. And what's so interesting about the Distillery District is that it's a college campus, and it's an event venue, and it's a brewery, and it's a neighborhood, and it is an employment district, and it's a district for artists. We broke all the rules in terms of how we brought together a mixture of uses. It's an area for light industry. It's a place for children, and it's a place for senior citizens. It's a place where you can raise your family, but it's also a place where you can very nicely grow old. We broke all the rules in creating the Distillery District, and what we've seen is it has become a magnet, a place where people want to be. The third way that we focused on shifting from buildings and infrastructure to people and complete communities is through strategic infill. So a big part of our planning in Toronto right now is about what I call urban repair. It's about places that don't deliver on the complete community objective that we've now needed to transform and turn into something fundamentally different. And here's an example of that urban repair. The buildings that you see in the background are actually the existing buildings. There's no street network, no pedestrian realm, no Main Street retail in this suburban neighborhood. And what we've done is added new buildings to create a pedestrian realm, to create Main Street retail, to add commerce at grade, to places for community and social events within this neighborhood. And because we've added density, now we can add a new library and a new school and a new community center. Those are the benefits of adding density in these strategic suburban locations. And this is what that new addition looks like today. We're also transforming the road infrastructure to create a walkable community. The beacons that you see here are all about providing a language for the pedestrian realm in an area that was pretty gray, that really didn't have clear spaces and places for pedestrians. So we've now integrated a pedestrian realm, and we've provided these beacons to draw the pedestrian into the site. And the beacons actually terminate right in the center of the neighborhood, where there's a new school, a new pool, a new library, a new community hub. This is about urban repair and taking places that were only one use, was only residential. If you wanted to go to school, you got in a car. If you wanted to go to the library, you got in a car. If you wanted to go shopping, you got in the car. Now we have a new transit, a new subway station at this location. We've added density, and we've added a mix of uses to adapt the urban environment and to deliver on this dream of a complete walkable community. We're also focused on urbanizing our avenues, adding density, and creating main streets where they don't exist. You know, if you want to create a walkable community, You need places where people can do their groceries within walking distance of home. So here's a classic example of, I usually call this Anywhere, USA, but it is in fact in northern Toronto. It looks like a highway. It's a big box center. The assumption here is that you would only shop here. The assumption here is that you would only drive here, no other way to get here. So this is how we are repairing and transforming this environment in order to create a complete community. First step, and this is under construction right now, 22 kilometers of LRT, adding a new backbone for how people can move in this area, light rail transit. Then adding cycling infrastructure, widening the sidewalks and adding green infrastructure to absorb stormwater, and then adding new mid-rise buildings and a mix of uses, transforming what is a highway with only one kind of use with a mixture of uses, as well as new mobility options so that people can move in a variety of ways and do a variety of things within proximity to home. So this is what the street looks like today. This is a very common street typology in North America, and this is the plan that we've approved and that we're building out. And this is a plan for creating and transforming an old suburban type street into a new complete community. It is an adaptation of existing sprawling infrastructure. And this is what the mid-rise building typology in these types of areas that includes green spaces in the center for the community, in fact, looks like. We're also urbanizing our classic suburbs, adding gentle density and new housing types in areas where there's currently only single-family homes. This is the site, the redevelopment site. It's a classic 1950s strip mall. This is the adjacent area. You can see it's a very green area. There are large-style ranch 1950 suburban homes. They're very expensive. They're very beautiful. And there's nowhere you can go in this neighborhood within walking distance of your home. You must get in your car to do anything, whether it's to buy some fruit or to pick up your kids from school or to go to the library. You must get in your car. So we've asked the question, how can we adapt this classic suburb and create a destination within walking distance of home that can transform the way people experience everyday life in this area? And this is the plan that is currently under construction. All of the parking has been put underground. You can see there's green roofs on the buildings. There are, right in the center of the site is a new public square. There's a variety of different housing types that have been added. So whereas before, when your children grew up and you moved out of the single family home, you sort of had to leave the neighborhood because there was nowhere to go. There was nowhere to downsize. Now today, you can downsize in your own neighborhood, moving into a multi-residential unit or into seniors housing. There's a significant amount of new retail that's also been added to create that hub and that destination within walking distance of a classic suburb. We're also working on adaptations in the public realm, ways that we can complete our urban fabric in order to enhance livability. And the first example, this is right in our downtown core. We are not blessed with an elevated highway. You can see the elevated highway running right through the center of the downtown core. This is our old fort commemorating the War of 1812. And you see up here new residential developments that are being built. Well, we've wanted, in fact, to link together the public spaces and the neighborhoods into the fabric of the city. And we're doing that through a project which is opened with skating rinks this past winter and is reopening again this fall with a whole variety of events and festivities, adapting the infrastructure below the highway that currently creates a barrier between 8 different neighborhoods and the rest of the downtown core. It is now becoming a link by transforming the infrastructure below the highway. Another way that we're adapting our infrastructure and creating places that can link together the urban environment is a project called Rail Deck Park. This is our main rail corridor where 68% of our commuters come into the downtown. It creates a huge gap, as you can see, in the fabric of the downtown environment, limiting the ability to walk from one part of the downtown to the next. We, in fact, are building a massive new park over top of this rail corridor to create the connection for pedestrians and the spaces that are needed to support the dense urban living in direct proximity to the rail corridor. And here's an example of what that will look like when it's complete. This is currently a massive gap of rail infrastructure. We're adapting this to become a park by building over top of the rail infrastructure in the heart of the city. And this is what it will look like at grade. That gap now becomes a connection right to the waterfront. And the last idea that I'd like to leave you with is that as we transform the city, we actually need to transform the discourse. We need to talk about the city in a different way. We can't just try and change how we live without actually talking about how we might live differently, why this matters, and how we can elevate quality of life for everyone in our city. And we've done this through a whole variety of ways. As a chief planner, I held chief planner roundtables, approximately 6 a year in the first several years, that were all about things like adapting the city for resilience. How do we transform our suburbs? How do we ensure that young families can live in dense urban environments and have the resources they need to thrive? We also created a program called Planners in Public Spaces, which was all about planners going out to the community and meeting the community in squares and in parks and having conversations about the future of the city. We're changing rapidly, and the risk is that people will start to resist change if they don't really buy into the rationale of why this is good and valuable. And we've also created a program called Growing Conversations. And a big part of this is our youth engagement strategy, engaging people between the ages of 18 and 30 in transforming the city through their participation in design competitions, in conversations, and initiatives that are all about advancing progressive public policy. And this is my last slide, and I'll just like to leave you with this. All of this that I've talked about doesn't really matter if we don't get affordable housing right. Because the risk is that we can create fabulous places to live, and that those places, as we adapt them, only become more and more exclusive. And as the new CEO of Creative Housing, my work is focused on, across Canada, building high-quality, affordable rental housing in complete communities, on transit, where we have all of the critical success factors to create a very high quality of life. We can adapt our cities. We need to adapt our cities. We should adapt our cities to become more sustainable, to become more livable, and to ensure that they are places for everyone. Thank you.